one foreign president, captured by U.S. forces, multiple oil tankers, seized in international waters, and an entire country's oil revenue redirected overnight. Yeah, that just happened. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a coup. It was something else. The biggest petrodollar grab in modern history. Because this wasn't just about Venezuela. It wasn't just about Maduro. It was about something much bigger. The US dollar's survival. See, Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on earth, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia. But lately, they started cutting deals outside the dollar system, selling crude for Chinese yuan, even crypto, and the second that became a pattern. Boom, the US stepped in, with court orders, with Navy ships, with a playbook built to seize control not just of a country's oil, but of the currency that oil flows through, and the twist. They're calling it humanitarian. This isn't theory. We've got executive orders, wire transfer logs, court documents, and tanker manifests, all public record. So here's what we're going to do first. We'll explain how the petrodollar works and why it's life support for US power. Then we'll break down the raid, what happened, how it was justified, and who now owns the oil. Then we'll show you how it's being sold, and why that sale is being done in dollars no matter what Venezuela wanted. And finally, we'll ask the question that actually matters. Who's next? Because once you see this playbook in action, you'll know exactly how it spreads. Let's go. All right. Quick context. This isn't just about Venezuela. This is about the system behind the system. The thing that lets the US run trillion-dollar deficits, print money like it's nothing, and still stay on top. It's called the petrodollar. And here's how it started. Back in the 1970s, after Nixon killed the gold standard, the US needed a new anchor for its currency. So it cut a deal with Saudi Arabia and later, OPEC. The terms were simple. You sell your oil in US dollars only. In return, we'll give you protection, weapons, and trade access. Oil producers agreed. The world followed. Because if you wanted to buy oil and everyone needs oil, you needed dollars, which meant you had to hold dollars, which meant you had to buy US debt, which meant the US could export inflation and keep borrowing forever. That's the petrodollar system, and for decades, it worked. Every oil sale boosted demand for the greenback. Every barrel sold in dollars reinforced American financial dominance. The IMF, dollar-based global trade, dollar-settled reserves, mostly dollars. But here's the problem: if countries stop pricing oil in dollars, if they start using yuan, rubles, or barter deals, the entire machine starts to wobble. And that's exactly what Venezuela was doing. After years of US sanctions, they stopped caring about dollar access. They started selling oil directly to China in yuan. They flirted with crypto settlements. They offered discounts to buyers willing to dodge US rules, and for Washington, that's a red line. Not just because Venezuela has oil, but because how that oil gets sold is a threat to the dollar itself. So that's the backdrop. A regime under sanctions, a currency system under pressure, and a White House that saw an opportunity. Because this raid, it wasn't just about Maduro. It was about making sure oil keeps flowing through one channel, the dollar. So let's talk about what actually happened, January 2026. The world wakes up to breaking news. Maduro, the longtime leader of Venezuela, has been captured by U.S. Special Forces during a covert extraction near the Colombian border. The charges? Narcoterrorism, money laundering, and massive corruption, all packaged into a sealed indictment filed months earlier in New York. But that wasn't the whole operation, not even close. Because while the headlines focused on Maduro's arrest, the real power play was happening out at sea. Over the next 48 hours, U.S. Navy vessels intercepted multiple oil tankers linked to Venezuela. Some carried Venezuelan crude. Others were flagged under Russia, Iran, or offshore jurisdictions, part of a sanctioned web of shadow oil trades, and then came the filings. In rapid succession, the U.S. Department of Justice dropped asset seizure warrants for dozens more vessels. The justification: illicit trade activity supporting a criminal regime. Translation: we control the oil now. Next, the White House signed an executive order. It authorized the U.S. to manage, sell, and redirect Venezuelan oil assets in the interest of the Venezuelan people, but under U.S. financial custody. Suddenly, all oil revenues from these seized ships would be routed into escrow accounts in U.S.-controlled banks. No payment in yuan, no crypto deals, no alternative currencies. Every dollar literally flows through U.S. legal channels. And just like that, without firing a shot at a refinery, without invading a field, without drilling a single well, the United States took control of a petrostate's exports. On paper, it looked clean, legal, strategic, but underneath, It was a financial first strike, because this wasn't just about grabbing oil. It was about defending the dollar by force, if necessary. Now let's back up, because this didn't come out of nowhere. Venezuela had been drifting from the dollar for years. Sanctions pushed them out of Western banking, swift access. Cut foreign reserves? Frozen, no dollars coming in, no dollars going out. So what did they do? They improvised. They started selling oil to China priced in yuan. They offered crude at deep discounts, shipped through middlemen in Malaysia and Singapore. They let Russia handle logistics. They even launched their own cryptocurrency, the Petro to bypass international finance altogether. And while most of that failed, the yuan trade stuck. In 2025, China quietly signed a bilateral clearing deal. Venezuela would supply oil in exchange for infrastructure, medicine, and hard goods. No US dollars involved, no US banks, no Western oversight. That's when the alarm bells went off in Washington, because when one country gets away with that, others start watching, and it wasn't just China. Iran was already doing it. Russia was all in on alternative payment trails. Even Saudi Arabia had started accepting yuan for some sales. And here's the thing, it doesn't take a total collapse to break the petrodollar. It just takes a trend. If enough oil starts getting traded in other currencies, the demand for US dollars drops, Treasury bond purchases slow, borrowing costs rise, and the US loses the quiet advantage it's had since the 1970s, global demand for its debt. That's what this is really about. Not Venezuela's politics, not Maduro's crimes, not humanitarian concern. This was a preemptive strike on a country that stopped playing by dollar rules, because the petrodollar doesn't enforce itself. It needs guardians, it needs examples, and Venezuela just became one. All right, so how do you seize control of a nation's oil revenue? Without owning the oil fields? You start with the shipping. By filing asset seizure warrants, the US didn't just target Venezuela's crude. They targeted the vessels, the insurers, and the intermediaries. Any ship carrying sanctioned oil could be flagged. Any bank processing payments could be hit. Any port receiving those tankers risked secondary sanctions. So suddenly, everyone backed off. Ship owners dropped contracts. Traders walked away. Port authorities asked for guarantees. Then comes the escrow trap. The U.S. Treasury set up financial structures, so even if oil was sold, the revenue wouldn't reach Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA. Instead, it would flow into U.S.-controlled accounts held in trust for the Venezuelan people. And who decides what counts as legitimate disbursement? You guessed it, the U.S. government. Next, they used legal proxies, recognized opposition groups, NGOs, even UN panels to create the appearance of legitimacy. But make no mistake, this is financial occupation. No boots on the ground, no shots fired, just spreadsheets, lawyers, and shipping manifests. And here's the genius part. Unlike Iraq or Libya, this version doesn't require regime change first. You don't need to topple a government. You just cut off its revenue, reroute the flow, and claim you're helping. It's bloodless on the surface, but underneath, it's brutal. Because once the US controls where oil goes and how it's paid for, it doesn't matter who runs Caracas, the money is gone. And the markets? They adapt fast. Western refiners who once couldn't touch Venezuelan crude are now quietly buying again. Only now it's legal, discounted, and flowing through a sanitized pipeline. Meanwhile, the actual infrastructure in Venezuela, rigs, refineries, ports remains rusted and broken. Workers go unpaid, output stays low, but the barrels still leave because what's valuable isn't the field. It's the permission to sell. And now? That permission comes stamped in dollars. So let's be real, this wasn't just about punishing a regime. A move like this always creates winners. Start with US refiners. For years, they were locked out of Venezuela's heavy crude, cheap, useful, and chemically perfect for Gulf Coast refineries. Now, they're getting it again just legally, through intermediaries, with a government-blessed discount. Next up, Wall Street. Once the oil hits escrow accounts, somebody got to manage the money. Investment firms, restructuring consultants, legal advisors, every step of this financial reroute becomes a fee-generating opportunity. The same firms that helped write sanctions law now get paid to navigate it. Then there's the Treasury. By forcing all Venezuelan oil to be sold in US dollars again, demand for greenback stays intact. Every sanctioned barrel that gets rerouted through US custody, it props up the very system that was under threat. And let's not forget the State Department. This becomes leverage. We're holding your money, behave, and maybe you'll get some of it back. It's diplomacy by escrow. But here's the twist, even US oil companies, who were shut out of Venezuela for years, are circling again, not to drill yet, but to consult, advise, and position for the day production ramps back up. Meanwhile, what does Venezuela get? No control, no full access, no long-term plan for rebuilding its collapsed energy sector. Just frozen assets, monitored sales, and international lectures about restoring democracy. So when you strip it all down, the people who benefit most from this raid aren't Venezuelans, they're traders, bankers, and bureaucrats sitting thousands of miles away in offices with American flags and oil price dashboards. So what happens after the biggest petrodollar raid in recent memory? Politically, it's chaos. Venezuela's opposition parties, long fractured, suddenly find themselves holding the keys to a kingdom they don't control. The oil's being moved, the money's being handled, but the people on the ground? Still stuck. No clean transition, no infrastructure rebuild, no functioning economy. At the Uni, countries are split. Some call it a necessary step toward stability. Others call it financial piracy, a sovereign nation's assets seized under the guise of legality. China calls it illegal. Russia calls it colonial. And they're not just talking. Russian lawyers are already filing challenges in international courts. China's threatening to freeze Venezuelan assets it holds as collateral foreign-paid loans, and in the middle of it all, Venezuelan oil workers still haven't been paid. Meanwhile, the U.S. doubles down. At press conferences, it's all about anti-corruption, restoring democracy, helping the people, but read the fine print. The U.S. Treasury will manage Venezuela's revenue streams until such time as a legitimate government is restored. No timeline, no cap, just until. That's not a rescue. That's an open-ended asset freeze. Let's do the math. The estimated value of oil seized and redirected. Close to $10 billion, amount dispersed to the Venezuelan public so far. Under $200 million, mostly via UniAid filters. That's 2%. Imagine someone takes your paycheck, uses it to pay off your landlord, then tells you it's for your own good. That's the logic and the timeline. Venezuela starts selling oil outside the dollar. 2019 sanctions intensify. 2022-2023 yuan trades increase. 2024 Maduro captured. Oil seized. January 2026 revenue held in trust. Indefinite 7 years of economic siege. 2 weeks of military and legal action. And now? An unknown future. Held in U.S. custody. Fast forward to the present. Venezuela's oil is flowing again, but not on their terms. The U.S. now manages marketing for key crude streams through third-party contracts. Some of it goes to India, some to Europe, some even back to China, just not through China's currency systems. Everything settles in dollars, every transfer runs through U.S.-approved banks, every deal has a flag on it. So technically, the sanctions are still in place, but in practice, the oil trade has been federalized. Washington controls the gate, opposition proxies sign the papers, and U.S. agencies control the flow of money. Meanwhile, back in Venezuela, production is still a disaster. Outputs it's around 700,000 barrels per day, a fraction of its historical peak. Refineries are crippled, fields are underfunded, corruption and brain drain hollowed out PDVSA years ago. But the cargo keeps sailing, and that's the trick. You don't need to fix Venezuela to use it. You just need a few terminals, some tankers, and a legal narrative. The actual oil workers? Still underpaid. The infrastructure? Still crumbling. The economy? Still in collapse. And yet, for global traders, it's business as usual. Petrodollars flowing, risks offloaded, crude bought low, sold high with a stamp of U.S. legitimacy. And here's the wildest part, all of this is being called a success. The media spin, order restored, market access regained, humanitarian pathways reopened. But if you look at who's still blocked, Russia's Rosneft still can't touch its stakes in joint ventures. Iran's credit lines remain frozen. Chinese oil-backed loans haven't been repaid. So who's really running the show? Not the Venezuelans, not the Chinese, not the uni, the dollar, still king. Because even in a broken country, even with a gutted oil industry, even after regime collapse, if the money flows through your banks, on your terms, in your currency, you win. Okay, let's zoom out. This wasn't just about Venezuela. This was a live demonstration of how modern petrodollar enforcement works. No tanks, no invasions, just targeted strikes on infrastructure, legality, and liquidity. It follows a pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Step 1. A country starts trading oil outside the US dollar. Step 2. The US imposes sanctions usually framed as anti-corruption or anti-terrorism. Step 3. Alternative payment systems get targeted swift access, correspondent banks, shipping routes. Step 4. When legal pressure fails, assets get seized, leadership gets isolated, and the dollar regains control. It happened in Iraq, it happened in Iran, it happened in Libya, and now Venezuela. So, why does this system keep working? Three reasons. One, the dollar still runs the pipes. Even if oil trades in other currencies, the banking infrastructure is dollar-linked. Payments clear in U.S.-connected institutions. Legal contracts default to U.S. jurisdiction. Escrow? Always in dollars. Two alternatives aren't ready. China's yuan is rising, but it's not fully convertible. Crypto is volatile. Barter's slow. No single system can match the speed, scale, and legal muscle of the dollar. Three, the U.S. still has enforcement power. Not just military, but financial, sanctions, seizure laws, and political leverage over insurance, shipping, and finance. So the message is clear. You can sell oil. You can even try to leave the dollar system. But the second that starts to work, the rules change. The dollar doesn't compete. It dominates through soft power, hard paperwork, and legal takeovers. This isn't corruption. It's design. It's the architecture of modern empire powered by liquidity, not bullets. And the question now, who's next? Because the U.S. just made an example out of Venezuela, and every petrostate still flirting with dollar alternatives just got the memo, loud and clear. All right, if this episode made you look at oil, power, and currency a little differently, here's what you can do next. First, drop a comment. Who do you think is next? Is it Iran? Nigeria? Maybe even Saudi Arabia? Because this wasn't just about one country falling, it was about a message being sent. Second, share this video. Not because I need the clicks, but because people deserve to understand the mechanics behind what looks like diplomacy and feels like robbery when oil gets weaponized to protect a currency. That affects all of us. Gas prices, inflation, global risk. And if your economy runs on dollars like most do, you're in the game whether you like it or not. Third, check the description. Every source in this episode comes from public records. Executive orders, Dodge filings, tanker tracking data, IMF reports, energy analyst breakdowns, U.S. Senate testimony on petrodollar strategy. Don't take my word for it. Follow the trail. Now, if you thought this story was bold, next week we're going from oil to silicon. Because TSMC, the world's most advanced chip maker, just poured $100 billion into a global expansion that's now under threat. From China, from U.S. overreach, and from a supply chain that can't afford a single mistake. One island, one company, one potential crash for your phone, your car, and your entire tech portfolio. Same pattern, different battlefield. I'll see you next week. And remember, follow the money.